Hello, this is a complete step-by-step tutorial on how to install an Active Directory domain. We're going to use Windows Server 2025. We're going to use virtual machines. I already have a Windows 11 machine. I'm going to create a Windows Server 2025 virtual machine. If you're using a different virtualization technology than virt-manager QEMU Linux, then you would use your preferred virtualization technology to install the Windows Server 2025 virtual machine. This is how it works on my computer. I'm going to select ISO, forward, browse, ISO, refresh. This is the ISO that I'm after, Windows Server 2025 English US. Choose volume, forward. 2 gigabytes of random access memory is enough, and 2 vCPUs is also enough. If we assign more resources than this, then obviously at least the installation part will be faster. Size, we're going to go with 120 gigabytes. It's way too much, but this is it. And we're going to name the virtual machine exactly like the Windows computer. So the Windows computer is going to be named DC1. Customize, finish. Let's go with UEFI, it's more modern. I'm not going to use virt technologies, so I'm going to go with SATA for the disk and E1000 for the network interface card. They're more than enough for the speed. Begin installation. The virtual machine image is being created. The virtual machine has started. It boots from the CD-ROM in live CD mode. The Windows installer is going to start. English US, US keyboard, install, I agree. I don't have a product key for Windows Server. And the selection is going to be the simplest one, which is Windows Server 2025 standard, but with the full desktop experience. EULA. Next, to select the disk. Okay, and now it's going to take the virtual disk, create the partition table, format, create partitions, and write files to the partitions. Next up, it asks again for the license key. Do this later. Password for the local user account administrator, which is pre-built, pre-exists. Finish. Okay, let's Ctrl-Alt-Delete. So we're logging in for the first time in the final installation of the operating system. We're logging in graphical user interface mode. Let's make sure that there's no CD-ROM available. Diagnostic data. Server manager starts automatically. Let's make sure that we have enough hardware drivers. So that's right click and on the Windows Start menu, Device Manager. It's probably okay. Let's make sure that the networking works. Seems okay. I'm going to not use the web-based management tools. So I have checked the checkbox do not show this message again for try Windows Admin Center and Azure Arc today. Next up, I want to configure this as a very special virtual machine. I want this virtual machine to always start when I start a computer. I want it to behave like a server. So that's boot options, start virtual machine on host boot up. I want the virtual machine to not use DHCP. Let's look a bit at the IPv4 settings. So this is the DHCP pool of IPv4 addresses the virtualization software uses, so 192, 168, 122. We're going to select an IPv4 address in here, hopefully one that's a bit outside the actual DHCP pool. Unfortunately, the entire range of IPv4 addresses in 192.168.122.0/24, all of them are inside the DHCP range. .1 is the virtualization software itself, and then 255 is a broadcast address. We are going to use the address 200 and we'll manage if the DHCP server actually assigns such an IPv4 address to another virtual machine. So the machine is going to be named DC1. This is the Active Directory domain controller. The IPv4 address will be 200. And then the domain is going to be local dom.local. And NetBIOS name local dom. Okay, so let's apply these changes to the virtual machine. Network interface card. We can use, for instance, the old control panel. It's still there. And network and internet, network and sharing center, Ethernet, properties. I usually don't use IPv6. Okay, and we want the IPv4 settings, which should be the following because this is a very important server type installation of Windows Server. So 192.168.122.200 IPv4 address, subnet mask the default one, gateway 192.168.122.1, and for DNS address we're going to actually use localhost. And this should be it. Next up, we want to configure the host name, the computer name. So right click on the start menu, system, rename this PC. So the name should be DC1. It's going to ask that we restart the computer, which we're going to actually do. Which means that now we don't have DNS resolving. While we still had, we should have installed all of the possible Windows updates. So do make sure that you have all of the updates installed. While I'm at this step, because this is a very special installation, it's virtual machines, they're not exposed to the network, I can do some settings that will make my life easier. First of all, I'm going to just disable any firewall. That's Windows Defender Firewall with Advanced Security. Disable everything. Windows Defender Firewall Properties, Domain Profile, Firewall State Off, Apply. Private Profile, Firewall State Off, Apply. Public Profile, Firewall State Off, Apply. People are not allowed to actually connect to this computer, so there's, in my case, no need for a firewall for a antivirus software also. So I'm going to disable the default antivirus using group policies if possible. Microsoft Defender antivirus, turn off, enabled. I'm actually also going to disable Windows Update. So Windows Update will work correctly, but just I'll decide when to install the Windows updates. Configure automatic updates disabled. Let me also enable the remote desktop protocol. So that's right click on the start menu, system, and then advanced system settings, remote, allow remote connections to this computer, okay. Let me prove that I can connect to this computer using the remote desktop protocol. So I'm connecting from a Linux machine. I'm using the package virt. This should be the command line. This is the user, so local computer, which is // username, the built-in user administrator that was created while installing Windows, initial resolution, and then IPv4 address, best features. And it works. Or not. It does work, but it doesn't like the .domain. So if I provide just a dot, it doesn't like, but if I provide the computer name, instead it will allow the connection. Okay, and we also want to be able to resize the window. The current user that was connected via the virtualization software's console has been logged out. I ended up restarting the virtual machine. Okay, and now I could connect using the remote desktop protocol client. I can resize the RDP client window as I want, and that will also resize the desktop on the Windows server. And now we're ready to continue with the rest of the steps. Until now, it's just a Windows Server 2025 installation. That's pretty basic and clean. We're going to start installing the Active Directory Domain Controller role. Okay, so from the Server Manager dashboard, manage, add roles and features. Next. role-based or feature-based installation, not remote desktop, the default selection. So I'm just going with next. And in here, I need to select the role number 2. So Active Directory domain services. I choose the features and go next. No feature from here, next. And then it's also going to set up a DNS server, which I agree with. And I'm also allowing the installer to restart the computer as many times as needed. Do you want to allow automatic restarts? Yes. And I press the install button. This is going to take a while. That was extremely quick. I'm not sure if it took 2 minutes. So it says installation succeeded on DC1, but additional configuration steps will be performed. We select close. And now we have this exclamation mark in notifications. In here we say promote this server to a domain controller. We don't have any existing domain or forest, so we do add a new forest. Root domain name, this is the DNS name of the domain, which is this one. Local dom.local. Next up asks if we want compatibility with Windows Server 2016 for the forest and domain, so Active Directory style compatibility. Maybe it's a good idea. In my case, I'm going to keep the defaults, which is Windows Server 2025 compatibility level. Asks for a directory services restore mode password. I'm going with the next button. A delegation for this DNS server cannot be created, a yellow bar, which we're going to ignore. And then it asks for the NetBIOS name of the domain, which is the pre-Windows 2000 type name of the domain. And pre-Windows 2000 would mean Windows NT4, which is antiquity, the 90s. So local DOM, it's just the first part until the first dot of the DNS name, and uppercase if this part is shorter than a number of characters, which is the maximum length of the NetBIOS name. Next. We're going to keep the defaults for directories. And then we're going to look at the configurations. It's going to install a DNS server. And we're going to apply next button. Next up, it says that a delegation for this DNS server cannot be created. The server will automatically reboot. I'm going to press the install button. This is the point where it's going to reboot automatically. The computer is starting. The installations have finished. The computer has restarted, which means that we now have two different users. There's the local user account administrator from the current computer, but then there's also the domain user administrator. And we're going to try to connect using the remote desktop protocol, but using this user, the administrator user, that's a Active Directory domain user. So the name of the domain is local dom, and then administrator. And we could log in. Let's actually prove that this is the user that we're using right now. The system is not performing the elevation. The processes that I start run as administrator. Let's see what whoami says. So domain local dom and then username administrator. So that's one of the users, and the other one is dc1 / administrator. Like this. At this point, we have a domain controller installed, but also a DNS server. And although we didn't specify anywhere any DNS server that our DNS server should ask for unknown records, the DNS resolve should work correctly. Let's prove that. And it works. Next up, we want to set the time zone for the current computer. So that's in Server Manager local server, and then time zone. We're going to change the time zone from the West Coast to the East Coast. So Eastern Time, US and Canada. At this point, our domain controller should be able to accept computers that want to join the domain. So let's start the other Windows computer and see if we can join the existing domain. So the computer has started. Let's connect. All of the computers that we join to the domain should be Windows and should have a way to ping the IPv4 address of the domain, and should also have as DNS setting the DNS server that's running on the domain controller. So let's prove all of these. Okay, so DNS server is the virtualization software, which is not okay. We're using a DHCP, which is okay. We're going to do the same thing from the old control panel. Change the IPv4 settings of the network interface card, network and internet, network and sharing center. Ethernet, click on it, and then properties. No need for IPv6. And then IPv4. I'm going to use DHCP for the IPv4 address, subnet mask, and gateway. But I'm going to use a static DNS server, which is this guy. So 192, 168, 122, and then 200. Okay. Okay. And at this point, we should be able to ping. So let's ping all of these things in here. So we want to be able to ping the, let's start with the gateway, which is the virtualization software. Would work. The DNS server and the Active Directory domain controller does work. And then DC1, which is the NetBIOS name of the Active Directory domain controller, does work. And then DC1.local dom .local does work. And then local dom.local, just the DNS name of the domain, does work. And the NetBIOS name of the domain. This one doesn't work, but if it's mandatory, if something doesn't work on this computer because you cannot ping local DOM, the fix is to add a etc hosts line. But we should be good for what we want at this point, which is to join this Windows 11 computer to the Windows Server 2025 domain. So right click on the start menu, system, and then advanced system settings, computer name, change, and we want to join the domain. Local dom.local, and asks for the user and password of a Active Directory domain admin. That's local dom /administrator. And we're welcomed to the new domain. We should restart the computer to apply the settings, including group policies on computer start, etc. Restart now. At this point, most of the features should just work correctly. We have DNS resolve. We have a network time server. We have users. We have a Windows 11 computer joined to the domain. Let's eventually look a bit at the users. So from Server Manager tools and then Active Directory users and computers, we could create additional users. Let's look at the user that exists already, which is this one, administrator, properties. The most important tab in here is member of. We can see that the user is member of domain users, administrators, and domain admins, enterprise users, schema admins, etc. So let's create two different users, one that's very similar to the Active Directory domain administrator, and then another one that's a plain user. Let's create some OUs, organizational units, for these types of users. Let's create one new organizational unit, additional admins, and another one with part of our organization, let's say accounting. Okay, we'll create a domain admin user. So right click, new user, and then that's, I don't know, John J. Eventually admin. Okay, so John J and is an administrator. Maybe there will be two different user accounts for the same John J. One that has administrative powers that this user should use extremely rarely, only when doing IT related tasks. And then one that this user should use always. For all of the other tasks like starting a desktop, sending emails, etc. Let's create a user account for a person from marketing. Let's look at the user groups. So Mary is only member of the default user group in here, which is domain users, and that's more than enough. And then for John J, we need to make sure the member of for John J admin is very similar to the settings for the user administrator. So administrators local, and then domain admins, domain users exists already, enterprise admins, schema admins. Let's see if I remember all of these. So domain admins, enterprise admins, administrators, and schema. Hopefully that's enough. And now from the joint computer that runs Windows 11, we should be able to connect to this Windows 11 joint computer using the domain users that I have just created. So local dom is the default domain. You don't really need to specify in the username field. So you can go, what was the name? And the same thing for John J admin. It's the first time that the user logs into the Windows desktop, so an entire directory is created for this user under c:\users with many directories and files in there. The user could log in. Let's just check that the DNS solving works correctly. And then we'll do some additional configurations on the domain controller. The majority of them related to DNS resolving. So ping google.com. And that should be enough. Let's improve a bit the DNS settings on the server. For that, we're going to open the DNS graphical user interface configuration application. And let's see what we have in here. So there's DC1, a DNS server. We have forward lookup zones. The one that has the name of our Active Directory domain in DNS form, local.dom.local. In here we have a record, DNS record of type uppercase A, which means if you ping DC1, the DNS server will know that to the hostname DC1 corresponds the IPv4 address ending with 200. And we want to provide the reverse, where we ask the DNS server what is the hostname of the computer with IP address ending in 200. It should answer DC1. For that, we're going to go to the reverse lookup zones. There's nothing in here, and we're going to create one. So right-click on reverse lookup zones, new zone. This is the wizard. We're going to keep the defaults, primary, DNS servers, IPv4, and in here we're going to present the subnet 192.168.122. That's what we have. And then we keep the rest of the defaults in the wizard. So next, next, and finish. Let's now connect to the computer that's joined to the domain, which is this one, and make sure that pinging works. So ping DC1. This is a forward lookup. We want the reverse, so that's providing the IPv4 address. And there's a command line parameter to resolve the hostname. And this is the difference between these two runs of the ping command. When we go -a, it computes that this IP address ending with 200 corresponds to the hostname DC1. And then it shows between square parentheses the IPv4 address of the computer. So this is what we wanted. Before enabling the Active Directory role of the Windows server, we actually changed the IPv4 settings in the network interface card, and we put as the DNS server just 127.0.0.1, which means localhost, which means we did not have DNS resolution. But then we have enabled the Active Directory domain controller role, and that has also enabled the DNS server role. And the DNS server has this setting by default, where if you don't specify any DNS server that this DNS server should fall back to, has this checkbox enabled by default where it says use root hints if no forwarders are available. And the root hints are available in this tab. It's a collection of a large number of well-known DNS servers. Next up, in the Advanced tab, we're going to enable automatic scavenging of stale records. The default scavenging period is 7 days, which is okay. We click Apply. Then we test our DNS setup inside the Monitoring tab. We are going to perform both a simple query and a recursive query. So I enable these two checkboxes. I'm pressing the Test Now button, and these are the results presented in this row, where both the simple query and the recursive query have passed. Let's close this. And then next up, more scavenging. Local dom.local, right click, properties. This aging button in the general tab. Scavenge stale records, 7 days, both settings. We keep the defaults. Okay, and okay. That's all with the DNS settings. And now if you have multiple domain controllers for your Active Directory domain, maybe you have two primary domain controllers in two different regions and you want different parts, different subnets of your Active Directory to prefer the domain controller that's closest geographically to them. You could, for instance, go into Active Directory sites and services. In here, we expand the node sites. We expand the node subnets. There's no subnets. Let's create one. Right click on subnets, new subnet. In here, we're going to provide in CIDR notation the IPv4 range. So that's, let's see if copy paste works. .0/24. Okay. We selected the default first site name. Okay. And now we have the settings, which is computers that are going to join the Active Directory domain and have IP addresses, IPv4 addresses in this range. So starting from 192.168.122.0 until 254 are going to prefer the domain controller server DC1. Again, if you have multiple primary domain controllers and you want to select that some IPv4 addresses should be served by one domain controller and some other IPv4 addresses will be served by other domain controller. And that's it with Active Directory sites and services. Let's look a bit at the computers and users. This is the graphical user interface configuration application that you're probably going to use the most when configuring your Active Directory domain. In here, you have your domain, localdom.local, and the two main types of objects that you have in here, which is computers and users. Under domain controllers, you have just DC1, you have just one domain controller, a primary one. The best rules for configuring domain controllers and Active Directory domains probably specify that you should have a pair of domain controllers at the minimum in order to have a better uptime. So you probably will have a primary domain controller and maybe a backup domain controller that's always synced with the primary domain controller in case something bad happens to the primary domain controller, maybe a hardware failure, a power outage, then the hot swap backup domain controller can start up automatically with the Active Directory domain database pre-synced. And then the rest of the computers that are not domain controllers are presented here in this part inside computers. And then you have users. We have also added additional OUs, organizational units. You're going to probably have a number of organizational units, and you're probably going to have a tree structure where a organizational unit is a child of another organizational unit. And this is it. This is how you install Windows Server 2025, which is the latest version of Windows Server at present, how you convert this Windows Server 2025 into a primary domain controller that will also install the DNS server role, and this computer will act as a network time protocol server for the network, as a DNS server for the network, and it will also provide users, passwords, and user group memberships to the computers that you join to this domain. In our example, we have just one Windows 11 computer that we have joined to this domain. So this is it. Thank you.